Valentine's Day is around the corner, and I thought it might be fun to talk about romantic subplots this week. Specifically today, I want to talk about love triangles. I love love triangles. I know it's a trope that's been done to death, and not always well, but I'm still totally here for it, especially when it involves marginalized people. I don't think it's fair to say that something's been done too many times when marginalized people haven't really had the chance to do it yet. So I'm all for it as long as it's done well. And who better to talk about romantic subplots than the romance queen, Taylor Swift. Quick disclaimer, because there's definitely an elephant in the room given the sorts of people who watch this channel and the target demographic for this channel. I do know that the reigning opinion among people with MFAs, and particularly MFAs in poetry, is that Taylor Swift is not a good lyricist. And despite having an MFA in poetry, I am not of that camp and of that opinion. I've been listening to Taylor Swift since I was in the 5th grade. In many ways, I feel like I grew up alongside her. So she's probably informed my poetry in covert and overt ways, and maybe even my entire poetic career. I've been blown away so many times by the raw emotion that courses through her albums, how she's able to capture so many mundane moments that people struggle to articulate, and do it in a way that, despite being deeply personal, makes it feel universal. I've found so much to love and so much to admire as I've seen her grow through the years. I think she is incredibly smart from not only an artistic perspective, but also a business perspective. She's mentioned that she categorizes songs by the types of pens that she uses to write their lyrics. 3 types of pens: quills, fountain pens, and glitter gel pens. The vast majority of her lyrics she considers fountain pen lyrics, which she describes as modern personal stories written like poetry about those moments you remember all too well, where you can see, hear, and feel everything in screaming detail. Quill pen songs are songs with lyrics that make you feel old-fashioned, whatever that means, but probably the equivalent of those lines during MFA readings where the whole audience goes oof. But then she also has glitter gel pen lyrics, which are more fun and commercially appealing songs to dance to. I think it's so smart to have all 3 in your writing, particularly when you're a YA writer, because you want to use the glitter pen content to pull people in so that you can then provide them with the fancier fountain pen and quill stuff, that deeper meaning. Unfortunately, I think a lot of MFAers will only hear the glitter pen lyrics because they're the ones on the radio and think they're representative of Taylor Swift's work as a whole. So they see her as this fun, commercially appealing pop artist that appeals to little girls. And what a mistake to disregard and ridicule things that appeal to young girls. There was a time that YA was treated the same way. It still is, actually. I was embarrassed to tell people I wrote YA while I was completing my MFA. Then I ended up writing a YA novel in verse for my thesis, so. Today I'm going to be examining 3 songs in particular, the 3 that form the Folklore love triangle: Cardigan, August, and Betty. I'll talk about what makes them successful in terms of the love triangle, and I'll mention elements I see in them that you can apply to strengthen your own love triangles. I won't be playing these songs because I don't want to get a copyright strike. I'll just be looking at their lyrics, but I encourage you to listen to them if you haven't already, because the music does add to them. They're all really beautiful. So we have 3 characters in this story. 3 characters talking about the same events from 3 different perspectives. Betty, Augusta, Augustine, maybe we'll just call her August, and James. Let's talk first about perspective and point of view in these songs. All 3 of these characters are teenagers when the events in these songs happen. They're all roughly 17, but Cardigan and August are written from a more removed perspective several years in the future, maybe even decades in the future, looking back on the events, talking about what happened and how it made them feel at the time. The impact there is that those songs are brimming with nostalgia and regret, and they have the sort of wisdom that I think the song Betty lacks. So let's look at Cardigan and August first. Cardigan is from Betty's perspective. The crux of this song is best summarized by the lines, "A friend to all is a friend to none, chase 2 girls, lose the one." And we know he didn't lose her permanently. We know that James ended up with Betty in the end, because Cardigan ends with, "I knew you'd come back to me." But we also know that he really put her through it first. We see that in lines like, marked me like a bloodstain, I knew you, tried to change the ending, Peter losing Wendy. And that's such an interesting reference too, because Peter Pan lost Wendy because she chose to go home and grow up, while he stayed behind in Neverland. And isn't that just every teenage boy? And what's also so interesting is that I read somewhere that it was originally Peter leaving Wendy, but she changed it last minute. And this new version gives Wendy more agency, and so gives Betty more agency in this song. From a craft perspective, I love the repetition of no and new, how it's repeated so often in ways that can be interpreted differently based on the context around them. Side note, this is one of my favorite things to do in poetry, repeat words that slightly change their meaning at every iteration, and I especially love doing this when I'm playing with or breaking forms that force you to use repetition, like the pantoum, for example. Back to the song, the first use of no is in the line, "When you are young, they assume you know nothing." And she says that twice before saying, "But I knew you." And that's such a powerful moment that holds so much weight, despite being only a contraction followed by 3 words. Because as the song progresses, we realize she didn't really know James. She must have been surprised by him at least once in their relationship, because he betrayed her. But she's not explicitly saying that here, because she's speaking in the past tense now. It's years later, she's so far removed from the surprise of that betrayal, she already knows everything that's going to happen, and she's just talking about the experience now. Before the music video premiere of this song, Taylor Swift said this song is about why young love is often fixed so permanently within our memories. So that's what's happening here. She's not telling us about the betrayal because we'll get that part of the narrative from the song Betty. We won't get Betty's perspective in Betty, but we'll get a sense of it based on how she responds to James in that song. Here, she's just talking about the entire relationship and what it meant to her. And that's powerful in its own way. Alongside the differences in perspective, all 3 of these songs delve into the theme of aging, coming of age and coming into oneself. In Cardigan, we have the lines, "When you are young, they assume you know nothing," over and over, which is challenged throughout with, "But I knew you," over and over, until the bridge, when it's challenged in an overt way when she says, "I knew you because I knew everything when I was young." And that repetition throughout allows for that line to land so powerfully. And of course, also the reference to Peter Pan and never growing up, but Wendy deciding to grow up. It's a theme that Taylor Swift explores a lot in her lyrics. In Nothing New, her duet with Phoebe Bridgers, she has the line, "How can a person know everything at 18 but nothing at 22? And I think that really speaks to how it feels to be a teenager versus an adult, young or otherwise. Let's move on to August now. I'll be honest, when I first heard the song August, I thought it was about the month of August, just like a metaphorical depiction of summer's end. Learning that it was a person really locked things into place for me. So this song is from August's point of view, and August is the other girl, the mistress. Though what I love about this love triangle is that the 2 girls don't attack one another. Their animosity is directed only toward James. And that's not very common. Usually there's some animosity between the 2 love interests. But I think that's lazy writing. I would so love to read more books where the blame is placed on the third person, the person actually doing the deciding. That's usually going to be your main character, though it doesn't always have to be. I think the crux of this song is in the lines, "Back when we were still changing for the better, wanting was enough. For me, it was enough to live for the hope of it all." And those lines really endear the listener to August and place the blame on James. They're saying that even though August knew James was cheating on Betty with her, she was able to overlook the indiscretion because she was living for the hope of it all. She sincerely believed that they were trying to change for the better and that he'd end up with her in the end. Phrases repeated in this song, "'Cause it was never mine," followed by, "'Cause you were never mine." That construction happens a few times, and then we return to it a new way in the bridge. We hear, "'Cause you weren't mine to lose, you weren't mine to lose," which hits so hard in the bridge, and then she never repeats it again for the rest of the song, which also helps to make, when she does say it, stand out. So it tells us that though she did technically lose him, She didn't really see it as losing him because you can't lose what isn't yours. She realized by the bridge that he was never hers. But she's justified chasing him anyway because of this other phrase that's repeated so often, living for the hope of it all. What lessons can we learn from these two songs for our writing? Use repetition, but change it slightly to help it land as the story progresses and your characters and their relationships develop. In a typical contemporary story with the standard 3-act plot structure, you want your main character to finish Act 3 in a place where they've been transformed in some way by the events that took place in Act 2. And that usually means they start Act 1 in the opposite place, or as close to the opposite as you can get, because all stories really, or at least commercial ones, are about transformation, and you can't have transformation if you're not starting in a different place. To speak in the simplest terms, and obviously I'm only tackling the romantic subplot here, but you probably have other things going on around that subplot. In Act 1, they think they know the love interest. That's the I knew you from Cardigan. Basically everything up through here, excluding these lines of wisdom from the older Betty, and the initial, 'cause it was never mine, and the back when I was living for the hope of it all, in August. In Act 2, they experience conflict that highlights the fact that they don't know about the love interest. But they're still resisting the necessary transformation that will take them to the satisfying conclusion. That's the next iteration of I Knew You in Cardigan, but it's more loaded this time. This time, it's not just knowing you, it's knowing the bad stuff too. And in August, it's the change from it was never mine, and you were never mine, to the you weren't mine to lose, which is a small but profound change. Because despite the whole thing being years after the event took place, it's the first time we see August having this realization in this song. The realization that she technically can't even say she suffered a loss here, which is so heartbreaking. And in Act 3, they transform as a result of what happened and the things they learned about the love interest in Act 2. For Cardigan, this means ending with, I knew you'd come back to me, and the porch scene, despite everything that happened. And in August, there's less distance between the climactic Act 2 moment / realization and the resolution in Act 3. I'm not sure there even is a resolution. August might still be working through all of this, still lost in the memory of when she was living for the hope of it all. And it's okay to leave some threads loose, as long as the majority aren't. I think this opens us up to a sequel about August. I'm interested to see where she goes from here. So maybe that's a prompt. Tell me where August goes from here. Okay, so we've got the two girls' perspectives and the arcs of their relationship to James, and hopefully that helps you strengthen the progression of your romantic subplot. But now let's look at it from the main character's point of view. Betty is also brimming with regret, but it's more guilt than regret, and part of the reason why is because it takes place closer to when the events happen. It's from the perspective of a 17-year-old actively going through the events and trying to make sense of them, and I think that's why it's so searing and heart-wrenching. We've all been 17, unless you haven't. Welcome. You're in for a fun time. Betty is from James' point of view, and James is really feeling the regret for what he did. The crux of this song is in the lines, "The worst thing that I ever did was what I did to you, and also, I'm only 17, I don't know anything, but I know I miss you," which is so darkly humorous in light of what the other songs say about age and knowing things in relation to age. Remember that in Cardigan, Betty said, "I knew everything when I was young," whereas here, James is saying, "I don't know anything, I'm only 17," and he's using that as an excuse for why he cheated. A glaring contrast. And there's other very clever, very explicit references to the other two songs here. The lines, "She pulled up like a figment of my worst intentions and said, 'James, get in, let's drive,' are his perspective of the moment when, in August says, 'Remember when I pulled up and said get in the car?' And Betty, 'I'm here on your doorstep and will you kiss me on the porch,' are his version of the moment Betty references in Cardigan when she says, 'I knew you'd be standing in my front porch light.'" In that moment of reconciliation, and I also love the return to Peter Pan here, we get to see how exactly James tried to change the ending through his apology when he says, will it patch your broken wings? Since we know in Cardigan, Wendy/Betty decided to give up her wings in order to go home and grow up. So that's a cool little moment. It may be a little heartbreaking since we know chronologically he asked the broken wings question years before she made the Peter Pan losing Wendy comment, which means his apology didn't patch her broken wings. What lesson can we learn from this song for our writing? In Betty, we see the trope of the grand romantic gesture, in the fact that James shows up to Betty's party and apologizes to her. Grand romantic gestures are a bit cliche, the whole standing under your window with a boombox image, but they work well when they're done right, and that's usually when they've been earned after sufficient conflict in Act 2. And there's something so powerful about it happening so close to when the events take place, instead of in some distant future. We get a sense of closure and a sense of reconciliation in this song that's missing in the other two songs, which again are from older, more removed perspectives looking back, maybe a little unhappy with how things ended up. And I did examine these songs in exactly the order they occur on the album, because I know Taylor puts a lot of thought into how she orders things. So it's really interesting to have this story told in this way and in this order. It tells us that James really hurt these women, and no matter how it might have been resolved, it had a lasting negative impact on them both. I also think it gives James a bit of a disadvantage. He definitely comes across as a 17-year-old boy, but I think it's a great song to study if you write YA in particular and you're wondering how to channel a teenage boy. I think it'd be really interesting to see James' perspective decades later, too. So that's another prompt. For joining me. I could go on forever talking about this, but I'm starting to feel a little unhinged, so I'll wrap it up now and I'll leave you with a clip of my best friend Kate's puppy Betty, which she got in 2020 and named after the Betty in these songs. Be sure to like and subscribe, and please do feel free to comment if you have other readings of these lyrics or other songs you'd like me to discuss, and I'll see you next week.